Thanks everybody for coming, and I'm going to talk about idiomatic Kotlin. I'm not an Android developer myself, and therefore the topic I'm talking about is very general, so it applies to all the application areas of Kotlin, not just Android or just server-side. And it's kind of a philosophical one, so everybody can have an opinion and interrupt me and say, no, you're wrong. Okay. So let's see if my slides can switch. Yes, they do. Let me introduce myself. I'm Anton. I'm based in Estonia, in Tallinn. I work for JetBrains for the past 6 years, maybe 7. I'm part of Kotlin team for the last 3-4 years. But my background is in Java, so I've been doing Java programming since 2001 or so. And I do work with some other products at JetBrains. So if you need to learn something about IntelliJ, TeamCity, or Kadana, these are the products I can talk about. But my main project is actually Kotlin. This is where I spend like 90% of the time. And yeah, obviously you can find me on Twitter. If you need to DM me and ask something, don't hesitate to do that. So I joined Kotlin team 4 years ago, and these were my expectations on the left. I thought I'm going to teach Java developers some Kotlin, but the reality was the different one, the one on the right-hand side. So Kotlin people actually tell me what I should be talking about, and this is where we have the conversation, and this is why I come to meetups like this one. But I want to learn a little bit before we start talking about the topic. I want to learn something about you. How many of you are Android developers? The majority, like all of them? Okay, who are not Android developer here? A few, nice. What are you doing? What's your, like? Flutter. Sorry? Flutter. Flutter, okay. Anyone doing Kotlin, like anyone using Kotlin for server-side development? For some things, right? For scripting? For data processing? Okay, all right. So majority is the mobile crowd, and I'm not in that majority. I'm in the minority right now. What else? What else? For how long have you been using Kotlin? More than 3 years? More than 5 years? Before 1.0? Sorry? Yeah, 2016. No. So it's like most of the crowd are using Kotlin at least 3, at most 8 years, right? Something like that.
We could have already before 2018. The hardware didn't work.
Okay, all right. And you're mostly using in Android Studio or IntelliJ, maybe in some cases, right? Have you tried Fleet? Yeah. Right. Does it work for you? Yeah, it doesn't work for me, so that's why I'm asking. Okay. Well, the previous presentation was about Kotlin multi-platform, right? And Fleet is the IDE that we intend to make the IDE for Kotlin multi-platform. And a lot of the development experience will be tailored specifically for Kotlin multi-platform because of the new paradigms, the new ways how teams work, and so on. And this is something we can implement on top of Fleet, but it's very hard to implement in IntelliJ. Right? So if you are into Kotlin multi-platform, I do understand that Fleet might be a little bit an early product to try, but still it makes sense to try it and provide the feedback, what's missing for you, so that we could quicker build a tool that is applicable to your project. All right, so what we are going to talk about today is the idiomatic Kotlin, just like programming language in general, right? And we do have this documentation page which collects various idioms. What do you think an idiom is in a programming language? Anyone?
A suggested way of doing things.
kind of. Yeah, why not call it a design pattern? Right? A design pattern is something formal. An idiom is something that community came up with and said, okay, we are doing it this way. It doesn't have to be a pattern, right? But if you try to identify some things in the programming language that makes an idiom, very often it's a combination of 2 or 3 features being used together, the way it's efficient, readable, and is intended to be used this way. So we collect a few things, like we collected a few things on this page, but we accept, proposals. So if you come up with some interesting recipe for this page, you don't hesitate to send a pull request. But I'm going to speak about a few topics, or let's say a few groups of the idioms that I identified for myself. You might kind of have some different groups after you think about how you use the language. Extensions are part of it, a big part of it, nullability, of course, and it all converges to type-safe builders, aka DSLs. I do have a small demo to show you. Before we start, actually, the DSLs. How many of you know that they use DSLs in their projects? So the majority doesn't know. How come? How many of you are using Jetpack Compose? Most of you are using DSLs, in fact. So let's see. But let's start with baby steps, basically, the top level or extension functions. So the slides that I made here are based on my experience talking to the Java developers, the Java crowd, right? So therefore, a few examples here are made for them rather than for you, but maybe you can relate. When you started learning Kotlin for the first time, if you had a Java background and you learned about some things that are specific to Kotlin, for instance, you learned that Kotlin doesn't have static keyword, which is actually coming into the row, not into the row, after to the row. Then you realized, okay, but I still need the static function, and you learned from the documentation that we have component objects for that. This is where you put all the stuff to make it static, and this is how you create your first static method in Kotlin, right? Then you learn, okay, actually, you don't need to implement this kind of things. We have a pattern or a built-in feature for that to implement singletons. So you can create a class that is not a class, is an object, and all the functions will be kind of static there. So that's kind of an improvement. But then you realize that you don't really need classes if you implement just the behavior, if you don't have to model the domain in any way, and you don't work with the domain model. You just implement the function, and that's kind of it, right? You don't need a static function anymore. But then you learn further, and you decide, okay, actually, I can implement it as an extension function. Why not? And this is where the community splits. Some say that, no, like, why over-abuse this feature? And some others say, well, but I can. So what's your favor? Like, how do you go about it? Like, when you need to create something, a function, a top-level function, how do you decide, should it be an extension function or not?
Static methods, aren't they? Probably they're not testable. They repeat.
They are. You can't, like, it's just a method. There is no distinction if it's static or not. And if it is static, you can still test it. There is no, like, it's not a technical problem there at all.
Can extension functions be sustainable?
Yes. No other ideas? Like,
It goes into autocomplete and goes string and goes all these methods and that the extension function comes up. It's always very helpful.
okay. Well, the general.
How does the first one, the third one does not improve that at all, right?
But the fourth one,
It doesn't know to show it to you if you go string that something, it's not going to show it this phone number.
If you type string dot, the method will appear in the auto-completion list.
Extension, right, but the one above the extension, is phone number.
Yes, yes. That's one way of thinking. You see, you are coming down to the programming style you use. Okay, I now have a value or a type, and now I'm going to apply this awesome feature of auto-completion to do something, right? Here, in this specific case, in this example, this is not the greatest example as is, because string is a global type, and what you are doing here is a type pollution, or scope pollution, to better say it, because you are adding an extension to a global type. Might not be a greatest idea, especially with the phone number, which is not universal format for all the countries. Same with any other global type, like integers or anything like that. So there you need a little bit more scope control over the extension that you're adding. But generally, if you have a domain model or domain object that you model, let's say a person, or a client or a person or something like this, and there you have fields, name, last name, something, address, and so on, that belong to that domain. And then suddenly you say, oh, I need to format it somehow. Is this format function actually, really a part of that domain object? Probably not. Maybe you need this format function only in some specific scope, and then controlling that scope is easier for the extensions. Plus, extension functions actually give you this big gateway into the ability to retrofit Java libraries for Kotlin programs. I'm going to show you that. But generally, in our documentation, we say you can just use it the way you want and come up with the rules you want. And therefore, the idioms in your teams might emerge and might be different. So what I see in different teams, in different companies, they invent rules how to use and apply extension functions. So for instance, one may create the extension functions and use it only in the same package, not outside of that package. That's a reasonable optimization, even for the compiler, because the compiler can do less work in order to resolve this extension, because it's only scoped within the single package, right? So the compilation will be faster, and so on. There might be different tricks applicable to different projects.
How do you restrict this for a package?
Internal.
It's for a module.
Internal keyword. Basic package maps to the module. There is no such thing even on the JVM as a module, kind of before Java 9, right? Okay, but I give you a real example, maybe not so applicable to your projects, but since you're using Jetpack Compose so actively, you will probably relate because it's so similar. So Spring, who knows about Spring? A Java framework that has been here for ages. It just turned 20 years old. 20 years. I started using it in 2004, and it was 1.0, I think. So there is an API in that framework, JDBC template, that has been around since the first version and didn't really change. So that's the utility class that is used for interacting with database, basically executing a query, getting the results back, mapping to the object, and so on. It's not an ORM. It's just, kind of manual thing, but it's very popular, very easy to use, and so on. So if I use this class to make a query to the database using, like in my Kotlin program with Spring Framework, this is how it's going to be. It looks like a Java program, but written in Kotlin syntax. So the query method is the one from Java. So it's a Java method. I'm invoking it. The first parameter is the query itself. The second one is actually the row mapper. This is the classical syntax where we specify the type name, row mapper, and then the lambda basically implements the single method in that type, because it's a functional interface. And then we have this last parameter, the ID, and it has to be the last for the reason that Java doesn't allow variable argument types to be on any position but the last. So imagine this query would have taken like multiple lines on the screen. So it shifts out everything from the slides below the screen, and I wouldn't see the parameters. This is where I'm thinking, oh, it would be convenient to have the parameters next to the query itself, and the role mapper somewhere else, right? It would have a reference and so on. But then for this, I would have to switch the position of the arguments within the query function, which is not possible because Java doesn't allow that. So what we can do when we start transforming this, or this is what we want to get, right? We want to swap the places. Sorry. Yeah. Then we remove the type name because it's a single lambda. We can map the lambda into the type. We don't have to specify the name. We can then move out the lambda of the parentheses because it's the last position in the arguments list, and we have those trailing lambdas feature. Everybody knows about them, right? Common knowledge. Nice. So we move it out and looks more Kotlin-ish now, especially if we reformat it. But we know that there is no such function in JDBC template because Java doesn't allow that. So this is actually implemented as a Kotlin extension in Spring Framework and shipped with the jars. So since Spring Framework 5.0 for the last 3-4 years. And it exists there, so you can use Spring Framework, which is a Java framework for 20 years, idiomatically with Kotlin with those extensions. And you can tailor any Java API for better use with Kotlin in this way. Just, simple trick. Add an extension function, that's it. Any questions? Comments? Bad practice? I'm wrong? No. Awesome stuff, right? Nice.
Why don't they convert JDBC to Kotlin?
You can take JDBC API. I've seen projects like this. People just added extension functions for their needs, where they needed them, and they kind of have a persistence framework on top of the JDBC APIs, just with a few functions.
But do you think that's going to make progress the ecosystem to rely on all stuff that is not based on Kotlin?
It's a philosophical question. Let's see. You see, like the Java ecosystem is huge, right? Saying that we are now going to build the whole new ecosystem for Kotlin next to it is not going to cut it, because there is a huge inertia in the technology world, and I'm still going to be using my favorite Java framework and library. And then if I'm sticking to that and I'm taking Kotlin, then I have this huge problem of mismatch of the APIs and the way the languages are intended to use. You see? Like, I have to use Java APIs from Kotlin if I'm not tailoring it for my own needs. Just with a little effort, I can do that. And if the library author or the framework author does that, then it's even easier. It just ships out of the box with the APIs and functions that I need. So Spring Framework is one example. There are others, of course. So even with this example, you already have seen quite a few features that you know. Extension functions, single expression functions, where you have this type inference of the functions. Trailing lambdas as parameters, where args not in the last position, but in arbitrary position, some conversion, and probably some others. So even this simple example shows that the language features are kind of Lego blocks that you can, put together to get a recipe, which makes an idiom. Let's take a look at the scope functions. Do you like them? Kind of, not very enthusiastic. Kind of, yeah. Some people love them, some people hate them, some people overuse them. There is a good documentation about them. If you think it could be better, let us know. But let's take a look at a few examples how they are used. This is a very typical example for using the apply function, right? We introduce a variable, we need to assign some properties to that object, and then we could use the apply function to scope them together and don't repeat ourselves, don't repeat this variable all the time. Can you name what are the benefits here? What are the good sides of it that you see? Readability, because less characters on the screen. What else?
You return only one
Sorry?
object. It returns only one object. You don't have.
That's intended, yes. What I see here is that the initialization of all the properties is scoped into one place, not scattered across the function or whatever code you're writing. So it becomes like one single piece. So that's the apply function, and you probably know how it's implemented. It's the inline function, and it's applicable to any type, and then it returns whatever object you're calling it on, right? So lambda with the receiver is probably the single feature that I know in Kotlin that I don't know in any other language in this form and shape. I haven't seen in any other, but usually Kotlin developers say that they don't invent features. So maybe it's taken from somewhere, but we don't know from where. So the other example that maybe not so common to see with the let function, normally people think of let function as a null safe function combined with this safe call operator, right? Question mark dot let, and then you do something. But the compiler engineers, this is the pseudocode from the compiler, from Kotlin compiler itself. So they use let function for this kind of pattern. So let me explain it a little bit. There is some complex expression. So they do some calculation with the expression, and there might be a result. There should be a non-nullable result, as we see here. Then they use the let function for mimicking pattern matching, basically. So you see, they're like in Kotlin, we have this when expression, and then we might check the types, but we don't have guard expressions. So here we check for the type, and with logical AND operator, we specify an extra condition, right? So this becomes kind of a pattern matching operator in absence of pattern matching feature itself. But let's take a look at the more like down-to-earth example, like that you could see probably in the application. Normally, like retrieve order, that's a result of the expression, and then we can check if the type of the order is a subscription, and then if the customer name is Anton, then do something. That's how it's applicable. So as you know about scope functions, I wouldn't dive into them anyway, and documentation is there, but there are few things that you might see in the projects where with the scope functions that are not so good. So this is a real example. Can everybody read it and see what it does? Can anyone explain so that I don't explain it? Yeah?
You give it a path and create a folder.
Give it a path and create a folder. Do you see that something is wrong here? I have a theory how this code came to be. Probably the person didn't really write it this way at first step, but maybe there was an evolution of this code, like someone added something, deleted something, and this is how it ended. So why use let on the path even at all? It seems to be excessive. You could just create a file and then also make the dir, right? So that's something with the let functions and probably all the new shiny things that people start loving, overusing, and then they plateau to something like a best practice with this specific language feature and don't overuse it anymore. So I don't really see a lot of overuse of scope functions these days, but I think 3-4 years ago it was like a hype. So this kind of code would have been very nice as well. Yeah.
Do you have IntelliJ rule to show warnings like that?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. To try.
There is one, yeah. It's like a...
We actually slowed down developing new inspections in the absence of K2. So the team was waiting when K2 is stable enough to proceed with the new features. Otherwise, it would have been double work. If there isn't one, it makes sense to create. If there is one, it makes sense to enable for this kind of things, yes. But wouldn't this other snippet be good enough for our case here? Why? 3 lines instead of 1. I mean, like the code on the top. If it was like a valid case, let's say, assume it's a valid case, not an overuse of the chained functions. For the person who comes to Kotlin from Java, just comes to Kotlin from Java, maybe even they have 10 years of experience, they have to read and understand it. The one on the bottom is a baby code. Everybody can read and understand it. And by functionality, they are not different. So maybe this one is totally fine. And the other one, this is how you would rewrite it, right? So it makes sense. For me, the flag has been always this also function. If I see someone using also, there is a flag for me. Do they really need it? Why? It's a side effect, right? So once you realize it's only for the side effect that is not crucial for logging, for debug logging, for instance, that's an awesome feature. If you have to debug the chains of calls, then also function is really nice for that. So you can just, with a few shortcuts, you can just remove everything. That's nice. Okay, I have some friends who have an opinion when it comes to scope functions, specifically when it comes down to writing Kotlin in functional style. So chaining let instead of nesting the function calls in the functional programming community tends to be the way to go. I tried it. I don't know. I think you need to get accustomed to the style. But I think it makes sense in some cases. Yeah, why not? Which one is easier to read for you?
The last one suits the order of operation.
So it's clear it's easier to identify the operation in the pipeline and the order of the invocation, right? Okay.
If we actually have function names that mean something instead of kicks button, right?
Yeah.
Well,
like
the first one tells me exactly what it's doing. The second one is polluted by lets, and let also.
It's just a pseudocode, right? But I mean, I tried it. Let me see. This one. So I tried. Let me increase the font a little bit. Oh, what is happening here? Some rendering issues. Can you see it? Oh, good. So on purpose, I'm not showing the body of the methods right now. They are folded, right? What if I rename this function? Watch this. It gives me a real name. It's not actually related to the topic of the talk. That's AI assistant working. So basically like a copilot or anything like that can rename the function based on the body of the method, right? So that if that's a square, it could be a square. So it's up to you to come up with the names, right? It's just an off topic right now. Yeah?
How do you highlight your shortcuts? I've been trying to do that.
There is a view mode called Presentation Assistant. And watch this. I can do this. I can put it anywhere I want, and I can actually call the position or size or settings, go to the settings. Okay. So Presentation Assistant you will find in the settings. Yeah?
Do you always use light mode?
That's a good, yes. Yes. It's not just light mode. It's a light mode with a light header. So a theme, there are 4 embedded themes, dark, light. This is the classical light, right? Light with light header, and then there's high contrast, right? So yes, I do use light theme, especially for demos and presentations. Okay. Let's go back to the slides. Some fun stuff as well for you. Let's talk about default argument values and name parameters. There are two features, right? Yeah?
So I had a question about the previous
Yeah, sure.
example. It's not equivalent, the two, right?
Yeah?
Because it also means that it's going to return a value while on the other one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I tried both, right? So that's exactly the same code. So
But it doesn't do the same thing.
they do the same thing.
Not in the same order.
No, pinpoint the recursive unit, but also
Okay, yeah. The return type at the very end might be different, but the result of the program will be the same, right? Okay. So you know about default arguments and name parameters, right? It's a simple feature. I think Java developers would really like to have it, but we all cannot have all the nice things. So how does it work? We have a function and an overload of that function. Basically, when you use that in Kotlin and compile it to the JVM, this is what it compiles to. So in Kotlin, we have this luxury of defining the default argument value for the method so that we can invoke it like this, right? But let's look at the other example where we have a class constructor with 3 parameters first as integers, then we have a color, we have a cube, black cube, right? And then we can create it like this. Would this work? Why?
You need a name.
Yeah, that's basically where I'm leading to, but why wouldn't this work?
The order. If you want it to work, you have to put them first.
Why the compiler isn't so smart to see that there is just one color and a string and just ignore the integers? I mean, you're right. Like, don't think that I'm tricking you or in any way.
I just don't know.
Yeah. The thing is, you cannot make everything so smart. It has to be predictable, right? And that's especially with the programming languages. It has to be like expected behavior. In some other with some other combination of parameters and types, you might get very strange errors, right? So it either has to match like exactly, or it will be a compilation error, right? And it actually has some other side effects of using the name parameters to make it work, right? So to make it work, we need name parameters. This is like explicit. It makes the code readable, less error prone, and so on. But the other side effect is that if you're looking at this code, like the previous one, if this feature worked, or let's say our the int parameters were the 3rd and 4th and the 5th, this would work, right? It wouldn't be a compilation error. In this case, when you're reading this code in a web UI that doesn't have any hints that you have in the IDE, or like enrichment, code enrichment is not there, then it's harder to read. I mean, this simple example, it is easy to read, but once you start reading like the real code, you don't have like the extra information there. And name parameters is this information that you actually need. So from the language design point of view, the designers decided, okay, we make this required, but then you will get the side effects outside of the IDE, not just in the editor. So actually, the default arguments diminish the need for the overloading in most of the cases. For Java developers, it's a thing. Yes, there are some cases where you need to do overloading because of the behavior, but I think it's rather a bad design. So you wouldn't be able to replace overloading with default values in these cases. But the name parameters is the feature that makes the default arguments or default argument values actually work. Without the other one, without name parameters, the first feature wouldn't even make sense in many cases. So that makes like an interesting idiom of the two language features. Let's talk about expressions. Alt-enter workflow in IntelliJ. Whenever in doubt, Alt-enter. If there is a yellow highlight, Alt-enter. If there is no yellow highlight, try Alt-enter. It will suggest you something. So assume I have this code in the IDE. I'm using Alt-enter. There is no warnings right now. So I'm hitting Alt-enter and if. Okay, there is a warning. It's like pale gray under if, but most people would not notice it. So Alt-enter, lift the leave the assignment out the if. So we get this kind of expression, meaning that we can inline it, because it's a single expression and a return statement, why not? So inline the variable. Now, since it's just a return expression with the result of if expression, why don't we convert it to expression body, like this? What else could we do? We could remove the explicit type specification. Yeah?
You highlight automatically drive and colon, and you can press backspace and it will give right away. You don't need to do Alt-enter.
I have to check that, but assume the Alt-enter is the ultimate shortcut in my workflows. So yeah, we remove that, and we can remove even the braces, and we end up with a single expression function, which is really, really concise compared to the initial example, right? But is it actually readable? What if I cover the right-hand side of the expression? Are you able to say what does it do and what does it return? No, right? That's not a good practice. In fact, for public methods, it makes sense to enable the library mode in your compiler. Do you know about the library mode? Yeah, you can configure it as explicit API or like warning API. So if you don't specify the modifier and the return type, then it can either warn you about it or just make it compilation error. That's a cool feature to have, but as you see, it's not really a language feature anymore. It's a compiler feature. So it's about the discipline and the tooling. So suddenly the whole thing floats out of the syntax, outside, into tooling, into the ecosystem, into libraries, and so on. So it's not just about the language anymore. And I think compiler ecosystem in Kotlin is going to be the most important feature of the language itself, because it can make Kotlin very extensible and adjustable to different platforms and workflows. So let's skip that, we know. But we can convert the if expression into when. So I was preparing these slides before sealed classes in Java appeared, and actually before when expression has been made excessive. Now you probably all know that if you start using sealed classes, then the when expression is exhaustive. It's going to check if you have like all the options covered, and it's going to be a compilation error since 1.7. So I think majority of modern Android projects are using something above 1.7. In fact, 1.7 end of life should come soon because we only support 2 major versions back from the current release. So 2.0 comes out, it makes it 1.9 and 1.8 that are supported. 1.7 is not supported anymore. Okay, so this is what we do to fix it. What I see in some other projects and companies, some projects are like, trying to apply or trying to use this when expression as a core language feature to build on top of, like in their applications. I mean, it's a core of their architecture. So you see, if they start applying it, let's say they're building a service that handles some commands coming from the outside, and they model the commands as sealed classes. So if someone is adding a new type of command, and if they use when expression without the else statement, without the else branch, then adding a new sealed class option would break all the handling points in the application. So you cannot miss the place to handle the new command if you build it this way. So we don't have it in the IDE yet, but I think it makes sense as a custom inspection or something like that to actually forbid using else branch in when expressions with sealed classes. I have created this custom expression myself, but I think it should be part of the IDE. Okay. So how else are teams using the when expression? This is an interesting one. So the compiler team in Kotlin is actually using when expression to replace if expression in this way. Why do you think they do it? Sorry? Well, it's concise just by the formatting, but number of characters is probably the same. It's the explicitness, because you say that in case it's true, I'm going to do this, and in case of false, I'm going to do that. With if expression, you're not doing this. To actually switch the 2 lines, the true and false, in when expression, you can just switch them. In if expression, you need to change the condition itself or negate it to make it correct, right? So
You make boolean nullable, and the other expression would be much easier to extend.
Maybe. That's
I mean, for boolean it would default, but
right. Yeah, but this is just an interesting case how the team is using it. Like a little bit unexpected, probably. Okay, let's skip the try and go to null safety. Actually, I would skip the null safety if everybody is convinced it's a good thing. Right? It's a good thing. Let's assume that. Let's skip that. Let's get to interesting part. The domain specific languages. So, as the majority of you said, I don't know if I'm using it. Let's talk about that. So, there are some functions and APIs in Kotlin, and even in the standard library, that kind of implement the embedded DSLs. It's common to call these things DSLs, but I think it's unfair. The thing is, it's just an idiomatic use of Kotlin language features combined together, as opposed to building a grammar, a compiler for some language. It's not a new language, it's the host language used expressively like within the same program. So for building the strings, right, the equivalent in Kotlin to Java is the build string function, which is basically compiling to string builder, exactly the way it's on the left. Or there is a Kotlin X HTML library, which in my opinion is not the best example of the DSLs that we have, but everybody can read and understand the code and make sense of it and see the structure and so on. So there is a benefit of using this kind of code constructs for building object graphs or documents or any structured objects in your program. And if you go to the documentation, probably DSL as an abbreviation, you can find it only in one page, in one place, somewhere written like in small letters, but the page will be called type-safe builders, actually, right? And have you tried using this, Kotlin X HTML? You have? Anyone else? No? So it was basically as an experimental library to see if we can do, if we can make HTML documents and mimic it within the language itself. The result of it will be the string or the text printed out as an HTML document. What I dislike myself about this API here is the plus operator, which is the operator overloading, and I haven't seen the applicability of Kotlin operator overloading besides this one. Anything else I have seen was pretty bad, let's say, even if Kotlin restricts it a lot, right? In this case, I would actually create another attribute next to the target, call it text, and assign this text to this one. This would be like much simpler. Yeah?
It's sort of a bit funny, I mean, like to put the target inside the parenthesis.
Yeah, I mean, you create an anchor, you say what the anchor will be, or the link, right? And then you need some other attributes of it. So why would I create target on the first line as a normal assignment and then use the plus operator overloading to specify the text or the label of the function? That's strange. Okay.
Did you say you haven't seen any nice uses of
Those that I have seen, I probably better would not have seen.
The ones in the list are good.
That's okay. That's a matter of taste, maybe. I don't really like it. That's my subjective feeling about it.
So in some graphical libraries, adding vectors, for example,
Very domain-specific use cases. I agree with that. Yes.
Compose makes quite heavy use of.
Sorry?
Compose makes quite heavy use of operator overloads.
Nice. So you are saying I'm wrong. Okay. Good. So another example, right? Ktor. So it was mentioned in the previous presentation. There you have a combination of routing DSL and the document building DSL, right? Intermixed in one function. And it's possible because those are not different languages. This is the same language, just used, idiomatically. And the core feature of this all is Lambda with receiver. So let's see a better example, which is a little bit more convincing for using the DSLs. That's a Java program, very, verbose, right, or terse code. Everybody can read it and understand. There's nothing wrong with it, but this is like a lot of text, right, for very little functionality. So what we can do is to transform it a little bit into Kotlin, but that's a very direct transformation what we can do in the IDE when we just paste a piece of Java code into the Kotlin file. It's going to do that automatically, right? Essentially what it did, it removed the type declarations from the left, removed semicolons, instead of calling the getters and setters, replaced it with the property access, string interpolation, what else, and new keyword is gone. But essentially, it's still the same code. It's still the same way of writing the code. What we can do is to try to transform it into some structure with the extension functions from the standard library that are scope functions. And then use whatever build functions there are in the Java classes. So imagine I'm building it on top of Java classes right now. So still the same Java types and creating this structure. So if we extract those apply functions or the blocks into the main specific functions, I'm going to create something like this. I'm going to have a function to create a client, to create a company block, to create a Twitter, and then I end up with something like this. So it reads like a simple document, structured with nesting, very easy to read. But there is a trade-off. I have introduced those new extension functions to the existing types. So it only makes sense if I am starting to reuse them as a library. And this is where, this is where some interesting things can, let's see at the example. So this is the example I had on the slide, exactly the same, right? Those are the three functions. So there's the client builder extension, there's company function, Twitter function, and then the client function itself to build the object. These are the Java classes, right? Client builder, company builder, Twitter builder. Let's see what they are and where they are. The model, these are under the Java package right here, right? Okay, so let's go back. Is this example clear enough to understand the problem, right? I have Java classes, I have created 3 extension functions that are now used in my Kotlin code and form this nice DSL for building the client objects, right? Now let's look at the client object itself. There is a local date field as well. Just added it. Imagine that I cannot change the Java code. It comes from a library. So we work in the team somewhere. I took one library, I took the other library. I'm creating the third library for some others to use in their applications and so on. So there is a date of birth for the person, DOB. Let's say I'm going to create a local date of the year, I don't know, something like this. March 24. So, because it's the local date, right? Sorry. Let's see. Yeah, it's a local date in Java. So, what we ended up here, that's the problem, right? We have a very nice looking DSL, nested and everything, extension functions, all fancy. And then suddenly we have this ugly invocation from Java APIs that doesn't look DSL-ish at all. What I would prefer to have is something like this. 24th of March, 181, something like this, right? And it works. How does it work? You probably know. Infix function, infix extension function, right? And let's look at the definition. There is an interesting annotation here, which is called context, right? So if you are using Jetpack Compose, the context parameters has been there for a while now, but it's an experimental feature. In my project, I'm still using this experimental feature, but it's going to be replaced soon with the other proposal. But for this case, it's going to be working, I think, 99% the same way. Maybe the syntax might change a little bit. So it's not coming to stable in 2.0, but I think it will be published as beta in 2.1 and then maybe made stable in 2.2. But anyways, this is the language feature that allows us to control the scope a little better for the extension function on a global type. You see, I'm adding extension function on a global type. And the idea here is that if I'm adding the extension to a global type, I want to ensure that whoever is using this function is going to use that in a specific context. And that context will be provided by my library, that date context, right? And I'm not going to force the users of my library to use any date-specific type because I might want to replace it in the future. So I'm not exposing my dependencies to them because otherwise, if I come up with something new, it will be very hard to migrate for my users to the new version of my library. So what happens here, I'm going to declare the block, the whole block that I'm executing this DSL in, like the parameter for the client function, as a piece of code that should be executed within the context that is required for this March function to appear. So how am I doing it is I'm adding this annotation. We call this annotation. I'm not sure if it's a right word or should be called annotation because whenever we say annotation, it's something like this, right? Yeah, but well, for the context, we say it's annotated as context. So the parameter itself is annotated as context. And then as a library author, I'm going to decide what kind of context object I'm going to supply to the invocation of that block. So now this block executes. If I didn't have this with block here, that would have been a compilation error. So we need to invoke this block within the context that is required by this annotation, right? And this way, the March function exists here. If I place this expression outside of the block, right here, you see it's a compilation error. I cannot use it. It tells me the function exists, but I cannot call it. It's a compilation error. So it's just an example how you can restrict the existing language feature to a specific scope and then control it better. With that, I think I don't have any more examples. If you want to ask something about IntelliJ here for you to teach you some shortcuts, but yeah, whatever questions you think you want to ask, go ahead. Yeah, thank you.